All right, hello and welcome everyone. I can see we've got a whole bunch of folks joining in the room. It is great to see you all. My name is Tyrell. I am our VP of Operations here at Scoop, and want to say first a quick hello to our very special guest, James Nason, one of the leaders, project managers, and just kind of definitely has gotten a lot done at SkyFire Energy today. So feel really privileged and lucky to have James in the room with us. James, good to see you.
Thanks, Tyrell. Appreciate that. Happy to help and chat and kind of help customers and prospective clients kind of get to know the platform. It's been great for us, so happy to share.
Love it. Yeah, and I think that's exactly it because we're gonna see in a few minutes that the journey that you all have been on at Skyfire has just been absolutely incredible. Like you've had this staying power of being around for over 2 decades, but you've also now been recognized as one of the greatest market leaders in North America. And you literally do it all, right? So I think that's something that folks on the call today are going to be hopefully really excited to see, right? Not only residential, but commercial, utility scale, community development, agriculture, not just solar, but then also thinking through, right? EV charging, storage considerations. And then, of course, the third thing would be you all have really done just an amazing job of growing geographically, right? That expansion challenge that I know so many folks and teams and operations struggle with because of the complexities that come with that. So again, when I talk about feeling really privileged to have your time here, James, and getting to have you all share a little bit of your journey, that's kind of what's underneath that. For those of you who are new to these types of customer spotlight innovation showcases, the way that we're going to go through this session is I'm going to spend, no more than probably 7 minutes just giving you a high level or introduction orientation to Scoop, our vision, where we kind of sit in the whole ecosystem of tools and technology. And that's really important for, I know a number of you are brand new, right? You're seeing Scoop for the first time. So I want to just kind of land the plane a little bit there. But then really the whole part of this session is going to be hearing from James and the experience that you've had and the team at Skyfire has had over the years, both in terms of us just like learning a little bit more about the context, the challenges, the lessons you've learned. And then you're not going to want to miss the very kind of end, the back half of the presentation, because we're going to hand the screen over, the control over to James, and James is going to take us inside of the Skyfire Scoop workspace and actually show like, the rubber has to hit the road at some point. And so we'll get to see some of those really specific details of like where, things like configuration updates or building condition and logic. James, you have this incredible, really powerful but simple analogy thinking of the project execution process in terms of gates, right? In terms of not moving forward until certain things are done. And so we'll get to talk and actually see that, which is going to be really exciting. So now that it looks like we've got a good group of folks in the room, we're going to dive right in, right? We jam-pack each one of these sessions, as I know many of you know at this point. And we're going to start with that high-level intro to Scoop and our team. And so for those of you who may be kind of hearing about us or learning more about us for the first time, whether you're a customer and maybe someone new on the team or, someone considering developing and really scaling your operations hub and your technology stack, we have been focused and we will continue to be focused on being the technology and the partner that allows renewable energy companies, both on the installation and the service and maintenance side, to continue to grow, right? And do the great work that you all are doing, frankly, in the world, right? Globally at this point. I think that's what brings us all into the room together is we care about moving this industry and the electrification of our infrastructure forward. We obsess about that just as much as our customers. And I think that's a really special point that we enjoy quite a bit is like being able to have those conversations and understand the challenges that, teams on the ground at Skyfire are facing and James, the teams that you have in the office and on the management side and being able to help connect those dots, right? So we're going to get to look at a whole bunch of this today, but today, Scoop is actively being used across over 250,000 job sites globally at this point, right? So we're really trying to build that community of folks that are moving the renewable infrastructure development space forward. And this session is a little bit of us trying to then share that knowledge, right? Bring the community together in service of being able to move forward more effectively. From a little bit more of a practical perspective, I think this is, we're going to show maybe two or three slides on, okay, what are we trying to solve, right? Like whether we're thinking about Scoop and developing the product, or you all are thinking about your operations. For us, it really boils down to these two very simple concepts. This is obviously oversimplified, but hopefully it starts to illustrate where we can play a meaningful role in the operation, which is, if you think about your business and your operation and projects and service work that's being executed, you really have two components of that business that need to be thought of and ultimately connected. You've got your tech stack, which is on the left-hand side here, and those are all of the systems that you're using to execute work, log data, maintain and track compliance, communicate with customers and stakeholders. And then on the other side, you've got your talent stack. And these are the people, the teams, the humans that are required to go out and do this critical work in the world, right? On the ground, both in the office and in the field. And for many of you, the lines that may or may not connect all of these pieces, you've probably felt at times can really be frayed and sometimes disconnected, right? As we think about a whole bunch of IT tools that might be more meant for the office, trying to push those out into office field teams and subcontractors, and then know that there's a whole bunch of information that needs to flow back and forth, communication, collaboration, and a whole bunch of documentation that needs to get back to a single source of truth so that you can continue to manage and maintain that client or client site or physical location over time. So while you can get away with disconnected tools and systems that really weren't built to do this work early on, what we see is that as your operation grows and your regions grow, this complexity can really catch up to you, and it can go downhill. That death by 1,000 inefficiency cuts can happen really quickly. And so just the big level or the high level picture of where to think about Scoop is really in that center of the operation. We think about it as the operations hub. So not everyone is going to be working out of Scoop every day, right? We are not the all-in-one kind of watered down platform across every team, but we do really want to focus on ensuring that everyone that's involved in a project, from say the contract being signed all the way to PTO, project completion, and over to service and O&M, each of those team members should be operating in Scoop. And then the other side of this equation is you still will have some of those critical tools, your sales CRM, your design tool, your accounting tool. And over the past 5 years, we've developed a platform called Glue, which is really an integration service that we can connect Scoop and those other systems so that you eliminate the need for duplicate, redundant, sometimes error-prone data entry between systems. And so with that combination of Scoop as a desktop application, as a extension in the mobile application or a native mobile app across iOS and Android, and then Glue connecting all of those to your other systems, we really hope to kind of shore up the entire operation from end to end. There's obviously a lot more to that, and James is going to be able to share a little bit of what they're doing on the Scoop side. But just wanted to give a high level picture of that. And then showcasing, there's two more pieces of the puzzle that we've really been thinking a lot about over, I'd say, the last 3 to 4 years. One is an analytics platform. So we have a platform called Looksee. You can imagine, and we're going to look at this in just a second, there's thousands, probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of data points that are being transacted in your operations hub every week, every month, every year. All of that data gets sucked into Looksee and then basically gives you an interface to be able to build more aggregate reports, right? Where is my business coming from and where is it going? And how do I see that on a week or month or quarter over quarter basis? That's Looksee. The last one, which is very new as of 2023 and 24, we call it IMRP, which is essentially inventory management and resource planning. And so, we found this gap between companies that start up and they're starting to, extend their operation, roll more trucks, have more crews, and you can manage inventory in a really simple way early on. But then again, it kind of those spreadsheets and maybe whiteboards on the wall, they start to fall apart. And there's a big jump to go to that ERP system, right? That's kind of the next step for inventory management, or build a full internal IT tool. And so IMRP is really meant to just be a plug on top, or a module that sits on top of Scoop and gives you your tables of what's currently in inventory across multiple warehouses, what's coming in, what's going out. And based on jobs that are new and coming into the funnel, what are we going to need in 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now? So a simple way to manage resources and inventory without a whole bunch of overhead and cost and implementation that kind of just sits on top of Scoop there. So not things we're not going to go into. These are different webinars for different days, but wanted to give everyone a bit of a landscape of, where we're at, where we're going. And of course, this is now where we get to transition into the topic for today. And I'm just going to spend a minute, frankly, bragging about James, the team at SkyFire, the work that's being done. You can see here, right, this amazing run, the longevity, the resilience, I think is really important, right? That's something that has been a challenge in this industry over time. Offering more than just solar and extending and kind of expanding that product offering, not just working in residential, but commercial, utility, community. The team is a really healthy size, right? 140 people. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not on this slide, but executing across multiple provinces. We're up in Canada here, which is really cool. Scoop is a Canadian-based company. James and SkyFire is a proud Canadian company. It would be the equivalent of, different regions, different states. So that I think is a really exciting piece of the journey of SkyFire. And the last thing that I'll share is, let's switch into looking at, okay, what have you all been able to accomplish in Scoop? And right now, right, you have over 100 users, active users in the system. We talk about the need for users to be in your operations hub for accountability, communication, and keeping everyone on the same page. You've been able to manage over 1,400 job sites and execute over 1,300 projects. And, all of this, we talked about that data being transaction. And, you've basically, the SkyFire team has executed almost 500,000 points of data, documentation, interactions to successfully execute and complete all of those projects and all of that work. And so, I mean, I think it's really an incredible feat. And James, with that being said, I want to kind of stop talking on my side and hand the mic over to you to kind of give us the introduction to SkyFire Energy and the journey that you all have been on as a company and a team, and then maybe a little bit of your experience at the company as well.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that. And it's funny to see the actual data points. I mean, this is stuff that I just take for granted, but it's a little surreal to see how many how those numbers have grown. But yeah, so SkyFire is, as you mentioned, we do it all. We made a choice a while ago to diversify into all kinds of different sectors and just keep ourselves broad, which is a huge challenge. And especially everyone on this call might not be familiar with Alberta, where we're based out of, but we've been in the solar game since a long time before solar was really much of a thing, especially in an oil heavy province like Alberta. We're a lot closer to Texas than we are to California. So, just to get to this point has taken a lot of creativity and dedication. And, I came into it 5 years ago with, inheriting a long history of just great culture and, strong problem solving skills and building a really, really solid bedrock for us to, be able to move into these other sectors, right? So, I'm in that residential space and, it's metaphorically, as much as it's the medium-sized type of a job that we do, it's also kind of in the middle of us as a business. It's like, it's a very bread and butter part of what we do. So, to access a platform like this, which has given us the ability to make processes consistent for that, that core of the business, has really helped us stay solid in periods of pretty rapid growth, as I'm sure, anyone who's been in this since 2020 or later has seen, things survived through strange times and really continue to thrive, right? So yeah, Scoop's been a really critical part of that process, and definitely happy to show a little bit of what we've done and kind of the models and the philosophies behind what we've designed with, and
Yeah.
hopefully kind of help people support and develop their teams in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and I think what I'm really excited for, James, is like, I think I love that you mentioned the culture, the team, because I think that is one of the most consistent things that we hear with companies that have really been just successful in their staying power, in their kind of slow, but ultimately compounded and meaningful growth over time. And just that resilience, right, to change, to be able to adapt and learn. And then that opens up the pockets to take advantage of the opportunities, which, I mean, it's really a proud moment to see you all being able to capitalize on that. And I think in service of that, like, I'm excited to talk about the philosophies that you've shared with us and that I think you all have developed that have kind of helped you build your principles around. It doesn't really matter whether it's Scoop or a different platform. You all are thinking about your project execution and your management of teams in a really specific way. And so I'm excited to learn a little bit more about that. I think before we dive into that, I'd love to just hear, because there's lots of folks on this call and in the community that are trying to evaluate, right? When is the right time? What kind of system do we need to make these changes? And so before we start talking about Scoop and maybe where you all are all today, James, would love if you could just kind of take us back to maybe a little bit earlier on, and you had this like strong bedrock of a culture and a team that was willing to work together. What were some of the things that you all started to notice that maybe started to lead to those conversations around, okay, like what does the next level of our tech stack, our infrastructure look like so that we can accomplish this? What did those conversations look like?
I think the shortest version would be that our growth started to outpace the platform in the center of the business.
Mm,
We had a Scoop precursor, which worked fine when we were building things and when we were still developing. But we picked up, and ultimately that platform didn't, right? It just sort of stayed static and was just a relic of the past, is what it felt like to me. And we were still using that when I was in the field, and I just remember just being frustrated at how dated it felt in terms of even its layout and things. So it just got to a point where the platforms we were using were not keeping up with what we needed, right? And
mm.
and I think that's going to be the story for everyone. It's going to be it's going to be a different line for everyone as well. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of it started probably to show in terms of, stress and impact on the people doing the work. Because, like you mentioned, we have a great culture. We all work together. We're an excellent team. Like our cohesion is very strong. Um, so you can kind of get through challenges and get through those inefficiencies just by working together and, work some long days and whatever. But, leadership at a certain point just saw that it was going to burn people out and just not work anymore. So, we just had to build for the future, and it's quite a long process for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been working together, and this is, our leadership was talking to you before we even met. So, it does take a long time, and it's definitely resource heavy in terms of energy and just creativity. But yeah, there's a certain point that you just have to make the call and say this is not working, because we can't rely on pushing our people in that way.
Yeah, yeah, and it's such a great full circle moment because I remember, those conversations a few years ago at this point with the leadership team, with the folks in the operation on the ground. And I think again that like it speaks to the importance of the change management process. Again, we get to see all flavors and shades of this in terms of what does it look like to go through the evaluation process really effectively, but then also turn around and make sure that you implement whatever tool or system it is in an environment that can be sometimes really reticent and resistant to change. And the fact that your leadership was involved from day one, really involved, like that was so impressive to me. And in some ways it doesn't surprise me that you all are where you are today because of that, because you had that engagement from top down, bottom up. But maybe just one more question to go back, and would love to just hear more kind of your, it can almost be your retrospective view, James, because again, I know like there's folks in the room that are asking those questions of like, what should I be looking for? How do I know that this tool is the right operations hub for us? And so if you're able to just share any advice or feedback on like, even outside of Scoop, what have been the most important, what would be the things that you would look for, or that you were looking for, or you were really thinking hard about in terms of what your operations hub, that system needed to have available to your teams to know that it could get you to where you are today?
I think the thing that I value the most in retrospect for sure is the once you've got over that learning curve as the administrator behind this platform, the adaptability and the configuration piece is fairly clever in the sense that the way that things kind of Russian doll stack on top of each other in terms of the layout means that a single change can resonate in an intelligent way through the design. If you're, I did have to do a couple rearranges of some of the critical display rules and whatnot throughout the growth process. But once that's in place, highly adaptable, right? And ultimately, the reason that adaptability is beneficial is because, as anyone who's in this industry right now knows, things change day to day, week to week in ways that we have no control over. So, if you get a new product or a new rule because of the changing industry or a government changes in wherever you are, you know, I can institute a change within seconds, literally. So that has been, as we've grown, something that has really proved valuable. So if you feel that this platform or any other platform can keep up with your industry, then that's going to probably be the most valuable thing for you and for whoever's owning that project within your team.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I guess it would be like, I know sometimes we take it for granted, but it's like the combination of you and I think like we've just found over the years that scoop leader, that scoop champion internally, which in this case, James, it's you, is uh invaluable. And sometimes I know companies can kind of under invest in that role because maybe it just needs like off someone's desk, or we'll kind of multiple people will manage it. But time and time again we hear when there's a leader like yourself that both understands kind of the strategic implications of what needs to be built, but also really understands like what do my teams need on the ground, on the roof, on site, in the office. It is actually amazing what you can accomplish in terms of those configuration updates, because when you click publish, you're pushing that change out to dozens, if not hundreds of folks, not just in the field, but also, or not in the office, but also in the field. And so it's like that combination of having the no code public self-publishing environment, but knowing that those are getting pushed out to all your teams. I think that's really, really exciting and really valuable. I want, before we dive into the demo, which I want to make sure we have lots of time for, I want to kind of just open up a bit of a conversation, because I think it will preempt and it'll help set the stage for the demo. And it really is around like how, James, you were describing the way you all have set up your Scoop account, and the way that you think about your projects are kind of like these critical gates, right? I mean, the comment you made to me earlier on was, in some ways, Scoop is a very simple system. It asks you as a user questions, and it doesn't allow you to move forward until you answer those questions. And based on your answers, the next question will be the right one in step and in context. So talk a little bit about like the philosophy of these gates, and in some ways the simplicity that I think you all have done a really good job, maybe in a couple of iterations, getting to in Scoop. And then if you can, like at the end of the day, like we need to quantify the value or the impact of any tool or any investment we're making. So, as you've been able to build out and realize this vision in Scoop, where have you seen the value or the impact in terms of the day-to-day operation?
Yeah, no, for sure. So philosophically, and I mean, I think anyone who's in an operations role in kind of an EPC environment like we're in is going to understand this. But as someone who's managing a project, in a funny way, we're not really doing a whole lot, right? Like we have to know everything, and we have to have connections to the rest of the company. But if I think about my day to day, I'm mostly just requesting things from other teams that actually do the real work, right? So, we're a pipeline, so we need to make sure everyone's got everything that they need. We need to collate everything, and we need to send the right request to the right teams, and we need to know that things have happened. So, one of the benefits we've got here is, like you referenced, that culture trust piece. So, a platform's only as strong as the people using it. Luckily, I'm blessed with people that are really awesome and work together really, really well. And if you ask them a question, like you're saying, this sort of question answer thing within the platform, they're going to do it, right? Like if they're answering it, unless there's some like extenuating circumstance, it's going to be true, right? So when you've got that trust piece dialed, it means that it really simplifies the design. And you can, these gates that you're talking about, the thing that was killing us when we were, like dealing with the growth was constantly looking backwards, right? It's like your attention is money, right? Like your attention is profit in the sense that, if you want to be efficient, you need to like spend your time smart. So the gateway, the most critical gateway is that first one, right? Like when you get everything from your sales team, if you can get it right in that first hour after you get it and just pick everything up and find, in 90% of cases, you can have the job effectively started. To be honest, these days it's like half started before I even have the actual handover conversation, right? So the gateway is going to be a little different each time, but there's some critical stuff that we're just, you know, some of it's populated by some of our integrations, some of it's populated ahead of time when you're kind of prepping for that handover, some of it's populated. So it's like there's these different times and data points and whatever. And I mean, everyone's familiar with having a million platforms to wrangle from, and credit to
Hmm.
Michael and the team on the glue side for helping us do that consistently. But um, you know, as the person who's collecting all that information, if you have something to support you and stop and ask you questions and force conversations, whether it's force conversations with your colleagues in sales or force conversations even with yourself, then you're getting the same questions every time and you can get ahead of it at that point. So, have you requested material for your job, right? Like it's
Yeah,
sounds so
simple.
simple, but and it's like, of course, if you didn't have a platform like Scoop asking you that in this consistent format, you'd get it right 90% of the time. But when you're using your workflow right, when you're trusting your team and when you're trusting yourself to actually keep track of things using those workflow stages, it just means that if you're in the middle of something and you get some 911 call, it's not going to like you don't need your brain as much, right? You can rely on when you come back to your desk from dealing with whatever happened, it's still going to ask you if you haven't told it yes, you know what I mean? So as long as you're being diligent as that project
Yeah.
manager, answering truthfully to yourself in that moment, and relying on those gates to kind of yell at you if you didn't get it right, then the consistency that's come about in this sort of like core bread and butter part of the business is invaluable, because it means that when you start a job up, like I said, within half an hour of that handover, you can have it pretty much ready to go, and then that just it frees up your mental space, right? It's you I kind of like get more anxious or less anxious based on how where my workflow stage filters are, right? If I've got a lot of new jobs, I know that there's stuff that I haven't done yet. When that's emptied out, I know that at least it's moving, and I can just pick and choose when I come back to revisit it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, and I know we're not going to have time for it, but I think one thing to call out is just to make the comment that like another kudos to you is you all have been able to track, like how how much time it's taking you on a per job basis as this rollout of Scoop has kind of come into play and been implemented and extended, and it sounds like you've seen an impact there, which of course, like you said, time, attention, focus is all money. It's all margin. And so I think that's really exciting that you all have been able to quantify that. I think one other thing that I want to call out, just because it's like the implications are so significant, but I think it's something that gets swept under the rug. I certainly hear that, which is, my team right now, they know what to do. They don't need Scoop because like they can remember up in their head. They take this picture, they go do that, and then you grow, right? And then you move into a new region, and then you have 10 new team members, and all of that stuff goes out the door. So I think the other thing I hear you saying, James, is by you, Abe, you being the leader that can listen and coalesce and make those changes within seconds or minutes and make sure the process is really rock solid for the end user. It also means that you have a training and onboarding script that is step by step to follow for a new person that comes into the team and is going to be learning all of these things on the fly, right? So you really become resilient to like your onboarding and growing of the team as well. I think maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong.
No, no, yeah, and I didn't think of it as a pre-done script, but you're absolutely right. And you know, when you're picking your person to run this, you kind of do want, like, I started in the fields and I moved into the office, and and I've got this like diverse set of skills, so I'm a bit of a Swiss Army knife, right? So like you don't necessarily want just any old person who's running this, because the reason that is effective for an onboarding, and we just had our first test case of this, like starting someone who's super sharp and super great, but minimal exposure to solar.
Yep.
She had a really, a smoother learning curve than I've seen in the past, right? And the reason is Scoop in that way is almost functioning as a teaching tool.
Yeah.
So you can take a Swiss Army knife who knows a bunch of stuff about a bunch of different things, and instead of having to have that person like stop their day and go ask a bunch of questions, there's things just being intuitively taught through the questions and through those display rules and formats that, if you pick your person and your tool to develop your tool, you know what I mean? Then yeah, your onboarding can focus a little more on like the nuts and bolts of the company piece, and then you can rely on the tool to kind of like check you, and people learn, she
Yeah.
learned pretty fast and she's crushing
Yeah.
it. So,
That's so cool. Yeah, I'm gonna shift gears and I'm gonna share my screen so we can get into the demo portion in a second, but I'll share a little anecdote because similarly, right? Because we're talking about team, we're talking about culture, and it's equally like how fast you can get the team ramped up and onboarded and into the right systems and processes, but it's equally about their experience, right? How hard is it for them to feel like
yeah.
they're contributing and that they belong and that they're doing great work? And so I know there's a couple of examples where, like we're going to see some of your gates in one of the pre-install scoop. And I know there's a few other customers that I remember talking to, and they took that lens of training and onboarding new team members even to another level where they created let's say it would be like a office manager training role in Scoop. And then they built conditional rules to show basically like description fields below or above every one of those gates that would only show up if you were in a training role. So like then you have this additional layer of almost like context, like you're looking through glasses that are your training glasses, and it would tell you, hey, this gate is going to be changing all of these things. So as you're thinking about entering it, here's the implications of that downstream that you probably don't know about yet, but you're going to see. And then after the course of, 4, 6, 8 weeks, you just simply do that, one-click configuration of that user from an office training role to just an office regular role. And then all those rules or those descriptions disappear because they no longer need them. So again, it kind of comes back to that, like you are the architect of your own design in terms of where you want to go and what you want to accomplish. But yeah, appreciate the fact that there's a lot of different ways that we can look at this. So we're gonna shift gears. That was a really good, I know it was a jam-packed conversation, James. Thanks for, sharing so much in such a short period of time. And I'm gonna get you ready to share your screen in about 2 minutes. But for those of you who are new, who are gonna be seeing inside of Scoop for the first time, I just want to share 2 slides, and this is just for orientation perspective, which essentially is in Scoop. I want us to focus just on these names here in Scoop, and you saw this earlier with the amazing amount of work and client sites that SkyFire has executed so far. A client site represents a physical location. So whether that's a residential, in this case, we're going to look at residential, even though this says a commercial project, you can have any type of project in Scoop, and those projects are always attached to client sites. And that way you can pull the information that's relevant from the site into multiple projects over time. But what we're really going to look at today is actually the phases or the steps of the project. And specifically, we've already talked about this like pre-install gate or phase, and then post-install gate or phase. And in our platform, we call those scoops. So Scoop is really like this self-contained modular work order set of checklist items that where teams can communicate and collaborate on. And the other side of this is, I think we're going to start with a live scoop so we can kind of see like what it'll look like to go through and answer some of those gates and see the data and the project kind of update itself through different rules. But what James also mentioned is each of those scoops, each of those project phases are entirely configurable. And so at some point, I'm sure we'll jump into kind of the back end of Scoop called the configuration mode, and we'll look at the templates for some of those and look at like how those rules were built and maybe some of the workflows. So think about those couple of things, right? Client sites, projects, and scoops is kind of the way that all the data is connected. And then you have your live environment, but then everything is also fully, drag and drop configurable. So with that intro being said, James, I will let you take over the screen and take us away into the workspace.
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect.
So, when it comes to the gateway kind of metaphor, that is, for my money, the thing that really solidified and made this platform, like that's kind of our bread and butter in terms of, how I've designed it and what's been beneficial for us. But at a certain point, I also figured out a way to, as far as simplifying my configuration piece on the back end, um, a way to um, simplify, I guess, the display rules. Because when I first started, I was learning how the display rules worked, and it was a little bit of a grab bag. And if anyone's done this before that's on this call, it's you can get some pretty convoluted logic, even though it's a very simple like yes or no. There's not a whole lot with the CDR platform when they kind of stack on each other, and for more complex project types, it can get a little convoluted. So I did streamline. So what I'll do is I'll just show you the way some of these display rules work, because what we consider a project started up, at the end of the day, it's going to be different for a different project type, right? If you're doing if you're removing and replacing modules for someone to redo their roof, that's going to be a very different project than a full solar install with a power wall. So the way that I ended up doing that was by having the vast majority of my display rules, or our display rules, I should say, driven by a fairly limited number of fields, with the idea that, every job from, like I said, a remove and replace to a full install is going to need accounting fields. It's going to need, contact information. It's going to need like this typical skeleton every single time. But depending on what the job situation is, I'd say the two most critical are this project type is what we call it. And so if you pick residential solar on this case, your gates that you need to get through are obviously a lot more fleshed out, because there's a whole lot of other stuff that you need to care about, rather than just a simple, a small single visit or a service job, for example, right? So this residential solar created a whole lot of other questions. So this is kind of where we're getting into, the actual parameters of the job, but this also gets us down to, like I was saying, this startup thing. So this little section right here has been the main tool for us to feel like we have control over a job, and that we know where it's at when it actually comes out the door. So when sales is done, by the end of that day, or maybe the next day, depending on what's going on with the integrations, once you've answered all of these questions here. So, we've got our own inventory management system. We've got our, internal design request tools, things like this, right? It's like by the time you've answered all these questions, the job is not done by any stretch, but you've started enough of the internal tasks and the rest of the team to know that you've got things more or less squared away, and that you can kind of at least take that stress off, right? You can at least say, hey, this is going to be ready to go. I might come up here and assign myself a couple tasks, right? If there's things that are weird about the job, I can tell myself, hey, come back in 2 weeks and ask about some special piece of equipment or some weird jurisdiction thing. But you've got a good idea that everything is pretty much squared away.
Yeah, I love this. And I want to provide a bit of high level context just to help kind of land folks with where we jumped in here. So right now, James is showing one of the scoops, right? So this is effectively a project phase. It is connected to a client site. So this is the customer, the physical location. It has a crew assigned. So James is currently the lead. It's in a very explicit workflow stage, which I know we're going to talk about in a second. And that's going to actually manage like the pre-install intake process. And then this project is also, this scoop is also connected to a project. And so anywhere that you go in the platform, you'd be able to see this project and like where it is on its timeline of execution. And then one of the other questions that I know, again, we're going to get to, but I'll maybe preempt it a little bit, is like, the question would come up of saying, well, if I'm someone new and maybe I don't know the answer to one of these, or maybe I just forget one and I skip it, and then I push the job forward. And one thing you'll see here, right, is a lot of these have these little gear icons. And James, I know you can probably speak to, what those are for and why they're there, but I think that helps with the validation side.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I'll just give you a super quick example that'll, if we can reference back to that training thing you mentioned. So, when you have a residential solar, every so often you're going to have to upgrade a panel or something, right? So, service shutdowns are a good example of something that a newer person would need support on, or to be honest, everyone needs to have. I'm not a construction manager. I need those expert eyes from elsewhere in the company to help me out. Scoop itself isn't going to do that, but I use Scoop to again like force that conversation, force that other process outside of Scoop. So if we're saying that there's a service shutdown required and you say yes, as long as you're being truthful, that's actually creating a new field down here that's asking you, have you set a meeting with a construction manager to discuss it? Right.
Nice.
So I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a journeyman electrician. And even I need that second set of eyes, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really good example of something that's an additional gateway that only shows up for a very specific parameter on a job. And it happens essentially in real time, right? So again, if you're relying on compliance and trust and people are saying what the job is, and they're not just kind of like dummying their scoops through just to get to the end, then you're gonna be able to utilize those gates as very effective checkpoints to, and as long as they actually set their calendar event and are meeting with a construction manager, then all of a sudden that knowledge about this job is being spread out elsewhere. So it's like, Scoop's like the node of data information. And then as long as you've got someone that's reliable who's sending that out, then you can just, keep it real simple and just ask yourself questions consistently.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, we can move on to the workflow a little bit because I think that's kind of the other piece that then validates this whole form. But I want to come back and keep kind of mentioning this, right? Because James, you keep talking about trust, and I think you're spot on. That like nothing, no system will work. Any system can be gamed, right? That's the idea, is like any process can be worked around. So, but then the question is, okay, well, how do we build trust? And I think your role as the Scoop lead, the Scoop administrator, that's the magic. Like that's the sweet spot because you're able to go out to your teams. And if someone on the team said, hey, you know what, like on this type of job in this jurisdiction over in, Vancouver or Kelowna or somewhere on the West Coast, we actually never need to answer these questions. And now it's creating more work for me and my team because like they're having to go through and just skip them. And then for you, James, to turn around and say, hey, that's great feedback. I can now update the rule so that we remove those and clean up your workflow so that your job just becomes more and more streamlined and more easier based on your feedback to me and me showing to you that I can make your life better. That is the
Yeah.
epicenter of trust. And so it's like you almost have all the tools you need to build that. And then it works, right? And then especially as you layer in validation, it also helps remind people where they need to go back and make changes. So I don't know if you want to speak to workflow and validation a little bit, and then maybe flip over to the configure side.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff, obviously, but I think just to kind of, especially if people are just getting to know the platform, I'd say the workflow is probably the most valuable because these validated stages don't mean anything unless you try and push something through the workflow, right? And then yeah, so this stage here, and I've got a few kind of peppered throughout here because I
And
do
by
have.
and by the way, for folks who are watching, we've just shifted over to the configure side of Scoop, and we're now looking at the template that drives that pre-install process. So James has now kind of put the administrator hat on, and we're back looking at how this is all built.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And there's a few validated stages because in some isolated cases, I've had fields show up later in the jobs that will still potentially need to be validated. But essentially, and this is the gateway here. This is the one. This is where we've seen the most benefit and the biggest stress reduction because
Mm,
this gateway right here, by the time we say this job has actually started, let's tell accounting this job exists, right? This job doesn't even exist in the rest of the company until,
mm.
procurement, drafting, these things have actually been initiated and are ongoing. And then at the same time, there's some auto-generated kind of emails that do go out, like if it's a specific type of inventory or inverter or something that we need a little bit of a different lead time, we can send emails to our warehouse and our procurement people that say, hey, this type of inverter has been selected, just so you know, right? And then that's the trust thing as well, right? It's like I'm just trusting that they're going to do it, but they at least know, and they've been given something in their inbox. They can get to it whenever they get to it, but it's just saying, hey, this job got to this point, it exists now, and it's got you know, whatever type of inverter.
Yeah. And even
Similarly,
to take, oh, go ahead, go, keep going, James.
yeah, similarly, we've got customer facing notifications built in too, right? So one thing that's been great for me is I can rely on, and not everyone needs to do this, so I've kind of created some duplicates that don't have these notifications, but I love having an automatic form email coming out that says, hey, this drawing is in a review phase, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, just so you know, right? And then I've got that baseline of touch points happening every single time, as long as I choose to do it and the job calls for it. And then, that people just feel more informed just automatically. And it's helped a lot for customer perception.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So maybe just again, to kind of summarize a couple of the things that I hear you talking about. So this little column here represents how many automated actions are being triggered every time, or at least are being considered every time a phase is being met. Because one of the things that you spoke to a little bit there is the same rules and logic that you build into the workflow in the form that says, hey, if it's, in this county or it's this project type, show these fields. You can also do that in workflow actions. Hey, if it's this type of inventory, we need to send a very specific type of communication to our warehouse. And then the other thing that I noticed is that you've created kind of like bypass stages. So from project
Yeah.
startup, based on the PM, maybe based on the customer, you can choose to either go to notify a customer based on IFR drawing, or you can actually like bypass the customer notification. So these are like almost like whys in the workflow that users can take, and like you've been able to program in, like, where do you want a direct path versus where do you want a path that maybe the user can determine, do I want to notify the customer, or maybe do I want to just keep moving the job forward? And so that's kind of what we're looking at there as well.
Yeah, and that's some of that's determined by style, right?
Yep.
Sometimes
Yep.
someone will just approach me and say, "Hey, I want to do it myself," right? And if that's their thing, cool, right? And so when I had that request, that was really quick. I just duplicated that stage. I did have to kind of redo a couple of the things for some of the more complicated workflow stages, but 5 minutes of work to give someone the ability, they're able to kind of customize their own workflow, but it's not drastically changing the overall workflow stage progression.
Yeah, exactly. And one other call out that I want to make again, because this trust seems to be like a really important theme and like component to consider. And I love, like, obviously your culture, Skyfire, has been able to develop this, high trust culture. In that example of like, hey, we're notifying the warehouse anytime a job is ready and mobilization is going to need to be scheduled in the future. And then we trust them, right? They get those emails, they have their process. And I also love the fact that in Scoop, let's say you have a very specific type of like, custom job requires, a ground mount and something else really specific. And you feel like, hey, sometimes we really need to have accountability on, say, the warehouse for that. You could have a scenario where, hey, for that very specific use case, we actually don't rely on an email. We create a brand new scoop. We slot it into that project based on a conditional inclusion, and we assign it to the warehouse because we want everyone, executive team management included, to know exactly where that material lives and to ensure that it gets to site. So you actually can, like, where you want to not totally rely on trust, you can build a bit more process and then pare it back where you feel like the teams are really kind of set off on their own. So, again, the flexibility to like make sure you're supporting the teams and the overall operation in the right capacity based on the context, right? Which is the most important. Okay, last example on the post install. Hand it back over to you, James.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I wanted to just point out as well, as far as how these the way the display rules work, is we can have things, because like obviously closing out a job is almost as well, let's call it as critical as starting it up. Um, this isn't as complicated as some of the startup stuff that I've got programmed, but there are things over here in the pre-install scoop. So for example, you mentioned the jurisdiction thing.
Yeah.
This is something that, like you're saying, if you're in Calgary or if you're in the next municipal district over, things can have fairly different requirements from permitting, for example. So if you're over here in Rocky View County, for example, you get a little reminder that you um, need to look at some. Come on, Rocky View County, what are you doing? Essentially, what I'm trying to get at here is, if you pick this county here, over here, you're going to get a new. Here it is. Actually, it turned up anyway, even though it didn't want to show me. So now you've got over here at the back end, there's a special letter, and some other jurisdictions have similar things, but there's a special letter that you need your structural engineer to put together. It's not going to ask you this unless you're in this jurisdiction or one of the other ones that has it. So, that the closeout's another important pipeline. That's a little more internal concern, but it gives you reminders of, you know, even basic admin things like moving folders around inside your database, right? Like, is this active or not anymore?
Yeah.
So that's the additional stuff that those if you streamline how many display fields are driving display rules, it can give you, it just kind of like keeps that it just gives you more ability to tune into the rest of the workflow and kind of change that and show different things.
Yeah. So right now, like it sounds like we've gone over project type. That one's a really critical one field that drives a whole bunch of the context of every scoop in the whole project. We've got the region, jurisdiction, AHJ, municipality, whatever we want to call it. And what's incredible is like you look at the as you all have grown regionally, you look at the number of different areas and kind of like jurisdictions that you're in. Any miss on any one of those projects with slightly different criteria is some type of like touchback, go back in the project. So there's that. And then do you do anything on utility as well? Like, are there any other fields that are like those key drivers? Just curious for what you've built.
Those are the biggest ones for sure. And
Yeah.
then from that point on, like those are that's like those are the tree trunks of the display rules, you could kind of think of it.
Yeah.
From that point on, it tends to be a little bit more so specific questions. If you answer yes to this question, you'll get a reminder. So yeah, those two really drive the most just because they tend to have the biggest um obviously project type is the biggest differentiation, right? So you've got that skeleton and then your project type fills in a lot. And then from that point on, your jurisdiction typically is they might add a couple other things, but they
Yeah.
might take away a couple other things as well. And then everything else within that is just these sort of question answer reminder kind of things. So yeah, that's part of why it's also become simpler for me to administer is because I've streamlined so much of the really critical display elements.
Yeah, and I just want one more last clarifying question. I know I'm going to bump up against time here, but we looked at the pre-install checklist, the gates. Those gates then I'm just assuming also drive like, for example, if there's an EV charger that's added, um, all of the install pictures and documentation and maybe any of the closeout inspection requirements. So like it is also helping with real-time compliance, like passing things like inspection and PTO based on project type, jurisdiction, and then ensuring that like everything is documented properly for the future as well. Is that right? Is that kind of how you've built it through each step?
Yep, yep, for sure. And the flexibility of Scoop means that, if I'm limited in terms of other parts of the company that I need to keep certain, names or designations a certain way, then
Yeah.
I've got, like you're saying, the EV charger thing that's not driven by those two main display rules, but it does, if I just find another field and I'm not kind of overloading my colleagues with too much stuff to fill out, then yeah, if does it have an EV charger? Yep. And then the the display rule functions such that in our installer template, they're now going to get a request for that photo when they wouldn't otherwise, right? And
Exactly.
installers especially don't necessarily have time to be messing around in these platforms. So, we keep it pretty simple for them, and that gives us the tool to like really strip back to only exactly what they need to be seeing to document.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, one of the things, and want to get us over to a few minutes of Q&A, Lucy, so I'll kind of tee you up. But James, one of the biggest takeaways that I've digested from our conversations, and I know I mentioned it to you, is this idea that you really have built your architecture and like your philosophy of Scoop. And this idea, for me, it was like, and you mentioned the tree trunk. I think that's a really good one, or like concentric circles, right? Where it's a very first principles driven way to think about it. Of we have a residential type of project template, and based on what's selected, let's say it's residential and solar, then the circle grows a little bit and it encompasses the next set of questions. Maybe we add an EV. It adds a few more questions. The circle grows again. What jurisdiction is it? Does it have an HOA? Like all of these things just slowly peel out the circle. And every job is going to have a different size, right? A different number of layers. But the context just continues to adapt and form. and is persisted throughout the entire project lifecycle. And frankly, it could move all the way over into your service calls because, again, some of that's going to go all the way back to the job site, the client site. So kind of keeping it really simple to start and knowing what are those triggers that are going to grow that circle a little bit bigger, and ensuring that you create those gates, because then that tees up the whole project for success. So I think with all that being said, a huge thank you to you, James. I know we could spend another probably 3 hours going through this, but just for you to even share some of those key concepts that have helped you along the way, that have kind of like also been the I don't want to say soft, but the intangible components of the success, the trust, the leadership involvement, the culture, the ability to work really closely across yourself and the different teams. I think all of those are really important takeaways. Lucy, want to open it up for you for any, probably time for 2 or 3 questions before we sign off here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo the big thank you. That was incredible to watch and hear. So thank you, James and Tyrell, and I'm sure everyone on the call appreciated all the insights. There are a couple questions. We'll start you off with an easy one, James. How long have you been using Scoop at SkyFire?
We went fully live for our transition, I guess I'll say, January 23. So it's been a year and change. And I'd say we were, had fully transitioned from the previous CRM tool, whatever you want to use it. I'd say by that late spring, early summer, we had kind of, divested ourselves fully from the previous model. And then from that point on, it's been that's when the comfort level really grew, was that summer, I'd say. So yeah, no, we're super established at this point.
Awesome. And then there's a question here about whether or not Scoop can be used for commercial and utility scale projects as well. Obviously, we focus a lot on the residential side today, but maybe Tyrell, you can speak to kind of the other fields that can use Scoop as well. And then maybe James, whether or not you're using those currently with SkyFire.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And I know, James, you and we are talking about this actively. And a little bit of it is like, where is the need in the operation? Where is there an appetite for change? And where is there that mandate to like really, move the needle? And certainly there are, utility scale, large commercial teams that are the only place, like they're only using Scoop in that part of the business. So almost the opposite of what we shared today with James. But I know that's also, been probably a topic of conversation over time at SkyFire as well. But James, maybe like, I know you mentioned like residential is a sweet spot for you all because of this like size versus complexity, kind of end of the matrix. But yeah, how have you all had those conversations internally?
Because it's been effective, there's always that temptation to apply it elsewhere in the business, right? And it's not to say it won't happen, but I think the thing that's extra valuable about Scoop is that it's for us who has a lot of established tools and processes kind of going into utilizing Scoop, we kind of grafted it onto the process, right? If you were building from the beginning, then maybe you'd be able to more easily incorporate more complicated projects into this. But because we were grafting this tool onto an existing business, the residential space they're complicated, but not that complicated, right? So, could you use it for commercial projects? For sure. But I will say that for us to get to that point, it would take a lot of ongoing, and we've got little things and bits and pieces we're doing consistently, but building that, to use a metaphor from a previous webinar, putting those wheels on the car as you're driving takes a long time for much more complicated jobs. And like the Russian doll nesting of complexity for a commercial or especially utility scale project, I think it would take a lot of time, and you could probably do it, especially from the ground up. For us, I don't know how long that'll take, but I'd like to try. But yeah, residential does kind of hit that, and especially because it really drives so much business for solar companies generally.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really good fit for that level of complexity. Maybe a smaller kind of commercial job, but yeah, it's an ongoing question. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I think you get to keep having that conversation because you have Scoop where it's most important and valuable, and then other teams can always socialize like, hey, we've got a very specific problem with our long-term O&M contracts. Could Scoop be a fit? Let's evaluate it. So it really is. That's part of the partnership, right? That's part of the opportunity to work together. Want to be mindful of time. We're at time right now. Lucy, any final questions we want to squeeze in really quickly?
I think we can squeeze in one more. So
Good.
this one is probably for Tyrell, more just about Scoop in general. So how pre-populated is Scoop, and how much customization is usually required when setting up platform?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a conversation that we're always having internally, and the target is also changing slightly, right? Meaning we continue to update our templates, probably every week in terms of what's pre-populated. And of course, there's nuances to every process. So we look at, James and SkyFire's configuration and the considerations they've made today. There is a huge amount of really detailed thinking that have gone into that. But a lot of the base stuff is there. And maybe the better way that I could answer that is where that's been really valuable. James mentioned it a minute ago, is if you're a newer company, right? You haven't built out that full operational hub system. Maybe you're coming up to that, 10, 15, 20 installs per month. That's a great time where like transitioning into Scoop as your first kind of formal operations hub or platform, taking those templates right out of the box, meaning we've got templates for every project phase across, residential and commercial, some service and O&M templates. Those will be really great to use out of the box for newer, earlier companies, where what I see with more established companies is they generally want to find that the sweet spot between what they're currently doing and what comes in Scoop. And that might be a little bit closer to a more highly configured workspace to match the culture and the workflow. So a little bit of everything, but there's a spectrum there, just depending on company maturity, I would say. Okay, I'm going to cut us off there. We always want to respect the time. James, huge thank you to you. I mean, you and the team, the whole leadership team and the whole team at SkyFire, inspirational. We appreciate the work you're doing. We appreciate the partnership. And that's something we didn't even get to talk about, right? The fact that we work with you and your teams probably on a weekly basis across, glue, support, customer success, innovation. Excited for more of that to come, and continuing the journey of growth. Wanted to just quickly showcase here, we've got a couple more spotlights coming up. And so a couple of leaders moving, I guess, over to the East Coast in the US over the months to come. So I know Lucy will be sending out some information on these following up. But with that being said, want to thank everyone for your time. Really appreciate it, James. Thank you to you and the team. Appreciate you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Everyone. Thank you.